Hello, I'm Graham Hughes and this is The Resistance. Today I want to talk about the three biggest Brexit misconceptions. The first of which is that freedom of movement only affects foreigners. It doesn't. It affects us as well. Until we leave the EU, we are free to go and live and work and settle down, start a family, build a house, start a company, retire in 27 other countries. That's over 1/8 of all the countries of the world that we are allowed to just freely turn up and settle down in, so long as we've got enough means to support ourselves. That's amazing. No one else in the world has that. Americans don't have the right to just settle in Mexico if they fancy it. They have to ask the Mexican government for permission to stay there, and they have to ask the government's permission to work there as well. And this is the situation in most other countries in the world. This is something that we've grown up with in this country. We've grown up with the idea that you can just go to France and Germany and work and it's not a big bother. We're the Auf Wiedersehen pet generation. But the reality is that's the anomaly. That's the weirdness. People in the EU are not normal because they have this amazing system where the borders don't matter as much in terms of actual legality and politics as they did in the past. They still matter a lot in terms of culture, and the EU has gone out of its way to try and help nurture the culture of the individual nations of the EU. But that's another matter. The fact is, us Brits are going to get our rights taken away from us. Our freedom of movement is going. So you can forget about your dreams of retiring in Spain, because if you can't afford to do that, then you're stuffed. And this is one of the issues that I have with the people who are pushing for Brexit. They're all really posh and they all seem really, really rich. It's fine for them. If they want to get their kids German passports, there's a way of doing it. If they want to get citizenship of Malta, there's a way of doing it if you've got money, if you've got the right connections, if you fill out the form correctly. The problem is the vast majority of people in this country don't have the same means as the filthy rich who are pushing for Brexit. And they've been lied to. They've been told, hey, get rid of all these foreigners and all your dreams will come true. When the reality is, getting rid of people from the EU is going to be devastating for the British economy. We're already seeing fruit rotting on the vine, in the trees. We've seen this massive apple harvest that's just rotting now because the EU staff are not there. The EU workers aren't there to actually pick the fruit. And we don't have any system set up in the UK for seasonal migration around the UK to do jobs like that. Perhaps we should work on that a bit more, but to plunge into the unknown before setting something like that up is pretty irresponsible. The second misconception of Brexit that I see all the time, and you hear this on the radio almost every day, is that if we leave the EU, we'll be free to trade with the rest of the world. Two huge problems with that. One is we're already free to trade with the rest of the world with the EU's muscle behind us. So when we're setting up trade deals with these countries around the world, and the trade bodies like CARICOM and Mercosur and ASEAN and ECOWAS, we have a collaboration of these 28 nations all standing together, representing their 520 million citizens and their GDP in excess of $18 trillion. That's a lot of muscle, and we've got that behind us for when we have trade deals, which is why our trade deals with Canada, South Korea, Singapore, and Japan, 4 of the 8 nations, the UN nation states that have got advanced economies that aren't in Europe, because there's only 8, we'll come to that in a second, those deals are much better than what Britain could possibly get on its own. So let's follow up that second point about there only being 8 advanced economies. This is according to the IMF, 8 advanced economies in the world that are not in Europe. And the EU has comprehensive free trade deals with 4 of them, and free trade deals in the works with the other 4. Well, the US trade deal's kind of put on hold until Trump's not president anymore, but it will come back. And so we'll be left with trading with the rest of the world and trying to replicate a lot of the trade that we have currently with the EU somewhere else. You've got the internal problem, the inherent problem of economic gravity, trying to trade more with your neighbours. For instance, We try to trade more with Ireland than we do with the huge states of China, India, Brazil, Russia, and South Africa, just throw that in there, put together. That's how much we trade with Ireland. And then there's the problem with the poverty around the world. And this is something that I talk about quite a lot. People don't realize how poor these places are. If you want to hear a politician, if you want to know when a politician's lying, they'll mention something about emerging economies as though growth is synonymous with wealth. It's not. If you have 1 potato today and you have 2 potatoes tomorrow, you've got 100% growth. That's amazing. But you still only got 2 potatoes. 54 countries in Africa. I've been to all 54 of them. Arguably 54 and a half, because Western Sahara was a member of the African Union and Morocco wasn't. No. Anyway, but I'm getting off the subject. You put all those countries together. So that's all the gold in South Africa, all the diamonds in Botswana, all the oil in Angola that's sold in 1 year. All that together. GDP of Africa as a continent. It's less than the GDP of France. You put the GDP of 48 of the 53 Commonwealth nations together, and don't forget, we're one, so it's only really 52 that we can trade with. 48 of them put together have a smaller GDP than Britain, than France, than Germany. They have half the GDP of Japan. This is a huge issue because we think we're going to trade with the rest of the world. The rest of the world is not as economically developed, generally speaking, as Europe, which is right next door to us. And if we want to replicate the trade that we're going to lose with Europe when we put trade barriers up to trade, the government don't seem to be want to be part of the single market or the customs union. That means more red tape, that means more regulations, that makes it more difficult for us to sell our products in Europe. So we'll have to look elsewhere to sell our products, but we're going to be going into markets that already exist. We can talk about emerging markets as much as we like, but at the end of the day, someone in India only earns about £4 a day on average. So they're not going to buy any of our luxury goods, which is what we mostly make. We make things for affluent people. And so we're stuffed there. And then to try and break America, come on. Who does that? Like, let's talk about musical acts that have managed to break America. There's been some brilliant acts from the UK that have never managed to break America because that market is already saturated in terms of movies and music and TV shows. It's very hard to catch a break. And those markets have established. They're already set up. And another thing about this whole sort of trading with the rest of the world, which we already do through the EU, is that we'll be abandoning the Commonwealth. So although I'm saying it hasn't got as much money as the EU, it hasn't got anywhere near the amount of money as the EU. I mean, representatively, India's got less money in terms of GDP than the UK. So you've got the Commonwealth countries, and then all you've got left over is Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And New Zealand's got a population of 4.7 million. I mean, these aren't huge countries. These aren't places where we're going to get a lot of bang for our buck. The combined population of Canada is about 40 million, Australia, which is about 23 million, and New Zealand, which is 4.7, is about the population of France. So, and then you've got the problem with these places are far away. That's a completely different issue, I guess, but the idea that we can't trade with the rest of the world until we leave the EU is not true. And the rest of the world being a desirable place to replace the deals we've got already, the trade we've got already with the EU, is unfortunately, in reality, it's not great. And the final misconception about Brexit, and probably the most infuriating one for Remainers like myself, is this: that if Boris Johnson just gets his deal through Parliament, then that's the end of it, and he's got Brexit done. No. As Karen Carpenter once sang, we've only just begun. You see, because this deal is not a deal, it's a withdrawal agreement. That's it. It sets out the terms for how we leave the EU, the timetable, and also it sets out a political declaration which isn't legally binding to say what we'd like the future of our trade relations with the EU to look like. So as soon as we leave on October the 31st, if we leave on October the 31st, November the 1st, we start the actual deal making, which is an incredibly intense and difficult negotiation. We don't have the staff, we don't have the people, we don't have any trade, we don't have any, I don't think, skilled trade negotiators working for our government. So we'll have to get foreigners to come from another country to represent our trade deal with our biggest trading partner. Don't forget the EU is half of our trade. If you had a shop and you told half your customers to go away and stop trading, stop buying things off you, you'll be like, okay, my business isn't gonna last much longer. And so we've got at least another year of negotiations at the very least. But even a relatively straightforward trade agreement like the CETA deal between Canada and the EU took 7 years. I mean, some of the other deals, I think the one with Japan took 19 years, but the CETA deal is pretty straightforward, and that's the closest that we will get with the EU. And that still took a very long time. So during this time, we're going to have a general election. We're going to have people arguing backwards and forwards whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. We have more uncertainty for businesses because if Boris Johnson gets his way, he will still be in a position where he can deliver a no-deal Brexit next year. So we're just deferring the inevitable, and a no-deal Brexit, as we keep explaining, as people in industry keep explaining, as every expert worth their salt in the world keeps on explaining, and even the people who want Brexit keep trying to explain, will be absolutely catastrophic for the British economy. It'll be catastrophic for British business because suddenly, instead of someone buying stuff off you for a tenner, it will be £12 or £13 for them to buy it off us if they're in another country, whereas the people who are making it next door to them, it'll still be £10. So they'll buy it from somewhere else, and there is very little to nothing that we make that's unique and absolutely cannot be made anywhere else in the world in the UK, arguably Scotch whiskey. But yeah, have you tried English whiskey? Yeah, not great. So there's only one way to stop Brexit. I mean, stop people going on about Brexit. If you're sick of hearing the word, if you're sick of hearing people talking about it, if you're sick of seeing filthy remoaners like myself out in the streets of London, a million strong, protesting against this nonsense, if you're sick of it, there's only one way to make Brexit go away. There's only one way to get Brexit done and over with, and that's to revoke Article 50. That's to stop this whole process and stay in the European Union.